Okay, final reflection video for my first clinical rotation. My name is Burton. I'm a second year student at Mesa College in the physical therapy assistant program. And my first setting that I worked in was acute care. I worked at ucsd Hillcrest here in San Diego. And I'm going to try and just kind of run through these questions on the list so that I can give my honest snap reaction to all of them. Overall, I'm just going to say from the get-go that, I really enjoyed my rotation there. I learned a ton. Let's see, what did you find helpful during your preparation for your first clinical experience? So I think one of the things that I wish I had prepared for a little bit more was kind of going back to early first year material on things like patterns for walking, training with the walker, step 2 patterns, step 3 patterns, and practicing how to coach it specifically. Because you can kind of play all these things in your head and practice on your other students and your peers, but it's a lot different in real life when you've got someone who has a real impairment in their mobility, and they don't take directions that well. So knowing how to communicate effectively with that is really important. And I think for me, because the setting that I was in, there was so many different diagnoses that I hadn't seen before, really, or maybe I'd heard it once in class and didn't really have a good kind of concept of what it really looked like. Going over pathology stuff, and then just not being afraid to ask your CI or look up something if you don't know what it is. So those things were important. Okay, next question. What would you recommend to a classmate who will be completing their first clinical experience in a similar setting to prepare for their clinical rotation? Okay, so kind of similar question. What I recommend to my classmate is one, I think going over the pathologies, like I said, line management, man. You work at the place I was at. We were on a different floor. Like every day, I was in burn, I was in trauma, ICU, the SICU, and especially those guys down in the ICU. People can be hooked up to a lot of things. So I think just having kind of a good idea of what lines do what and where they hook up to is something that's probably pretty good to review. But man, you really, once you're there, you just need the reps on it, because you can, once again, you play it out in your head and you can do all the mock scenarios you want, but it's when you actually have someone there who is being supported by these different lines and you can't mess it up, it looks a lot different and it feels a lot different emotionally. So you just want to make sure that you're right about that kind of stuff. And obviously, first rotation, you're not expected to necessarily be 100% at that all the time. That's why your CI is there. So lean on them and, have other people assist you if you need it. Specific challenges that I experienced. What strategies did I implement? I think one of the biggest takeaways I took from specifically acute care, and I had a fantastic CI, was that half of kind of what being a good therapist is in this setting is, and I think it probably applies to many other things too, is half of it is your technical skills, like how well can you actually carry out the treatment, and then half of being a good therapist in a hospital like this is just being a good communicator, being an effective communicator, because you'll have, not just with the patients, but also with the nursing staff, with I did a lot of co-treatments with occupational therapy, and knowing what information that you need to give them. Everybody's busy in the hospital. You're always doing stuff, so rambling on about stuff that they don't necessarily need to know is it's important to make things clear and concise for the other medical employees and staff who you're coordinating with. And then in terms of patients, I mean, you're going to have a lot of people who are having basically the worst day of their life, and you need to be able to come from a place of empathy, but also be able to kind of set that boundary line for yourself and the patient. Make sure that they understand like when that line has been crossed and that they can't abuse your care. It's not acceptable, but still coming in from a place of empathy. I think one of the challenges that I specifically experienced was, I think there's a kind of a curiosity that you have with some patients you might have in the hospital, where you start to maybe dig a little bit deeper, or you hear some other staff talking about like a particular patient and how they got here. And I think the thing that I learned from that was that just for me, I realized that digging too deep or hyper focusing on the social background doesn't necessarily help you do your job as a therapist better. So you need to know the relevant information. You need to know kind of what their goals are. But when you walk in that room, you got to kind of leave your biases and preconceptions at the door and just treat the person in front of you as they are at that moment, because you're always going to hear a bunch of stories, but at the end of the day, if you can't remove yourself from your kind of snap emotions about this person, how they might be, or one way or another, I think it's really hard to cut it in this kind of setting. And I kind of went out of my way to make a point of, knowing only the things that I needed to know relevant to what would make me effective treating in that therapy session, and not spending time focusing on other stuff about maybe their situation that wouldn't help me get them better or back to being as mobile as possible. Okay. Discuss expectations of your CI and facility, such as time management, documentation, patient safety interventions, discharge planning, and anything else that I think is important. So I think one thing to know about UCSD Hillcrest is that PTAs kind of have this unique opportunity and are expected to kind of be a jack of all trades. Like my kind of standard workflow would be, I would show up in the morning, I would look on the wall to see where I was assigned for the day, and it could have been any number of places. Could have been burn, could have been trauma, could have been in the psychiatric ward, and I think that you have to be able to be someone who's flexible and not have like any hang-ups about going into situations that you're uncomfortable in. You have to be able to arrive at any situation and come up with a good game plan, which I thought was an awesome experience for me. I think it's a challenge. It was very challenging for my first rotation, but I think that if you conquer and feel confident with the techniques that you need to employ in a setting like this, where you have a really kind of diverse group of patients in the population who have sometimes a laundry list of medical diagnoses, and that's not even their chief problem at the time, but you have to be aware of them, you can feel pretty confident going into most other acute situations. So I'd say for this setting, if you're looking for a challenge, I think this is a really good place for people who want to see their skills fine-tuned and so on, and especially work on communicating with people who maybe aren't so similar to you. You have to do a lot of stepping outside of your own kind of comfort zone to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is different than you. Documentation wise, I was terrible at it at first. I think everyone probably starts that way. No one's fast and accurate 100% of the time, but timing myself every single time I did it, and just having your kind of eye on the clock. Like, I think my first note that I did took me 40 minutes, and I got it down to around 15 minutes average by the end of only 2 months. And I think I attribute that mostly to the fact that I was looking. I had a timer set up every single time, so I wasn't dilly-dallying around. And you really don't have much downtime in general. So sometimes you're sneaking in half of a note in between your patients that you see, and you don't want to have to stay later than 4 or 5 or whenever you get off. So you want to make sure that you're efficient about that time. I would say in terms of the community of the hospital at UCSD is really great. The rehab department, very welcoming, and would try everything they could to make me feel comfortable and make sure I feel supported. Just like being aware that you're not always going to have 100% of the answers, and that's what makes the hospital such a special place, is that you have this person who specializes in the burn unit as a physical therapist, and nurses and doctors who have this whole wealth of knowledge that if you can draw on, and as long as you're communicating professionally and efficiently with them, and not kind of stepping outside, recognizing like when you're outside the scope of your own understanding of a certain patient's diagnosis or problem and how you might approach it. One thing in particular that was sometimes really useful is that we would sometimes get notes from our psychiatric specialist describing how to communicate with maybe some more different challenging patients, and how your approach should be, like what your cadence and your tone, and what things not to do. And I found this really, really helpful when you would have maybe a patient who has a cognitive deficit, and maybe they have a slow reaction time to your questions or your commands, or maybe you have a really challenging patient who's very unmotivated, and you gotta find some way to redirect them basically to make it a productive session. And you're not always going to get that, but I think that you can build those skills and you can get more successes over time. Let's see. What did you like about your setting, and could you see yourself working with this patient population? Yeah, I mean, I did not expect to feel as at home as I did by the end of my rotation. I was honestly, before starting this rotation, I was kind of dreading going to the hospital. I kind of was thinking of it as a quick stop for me. I always kind of associated physical therapy with the orthopedic side of things, and by the time I left, I was really sad to go. I really enjoyed it, and I felt like when you see the impact you make on people in some of these acute stages, it can be really moving. And yes, the reality is that sometimes you're not going to have the success stories, but as a healthcare professional, you're obligated to just keep trying anyway. And for me, I always tell myself, I keep those little successes kind of in the back of my mind, because they serve as good motivation for you every time you walk into the room to be the best possible therapist that you can for whatever patient you encounter, even if they're really challenging. So yeah, I would definitely consider working in this setting. And I think you get good at something and you start to like it more, right? So when you start to see yourself improve, it builds confidence and enthusiasm, I think, for the role. And then last question, share my thoughts about healthcare during the era of COVID-19. And this, I wouldn't say that it had a big impact on my time while I was there. It was generally, like I wore a mask every day. But you just do that in the hospital most of the time anyway, because you're trying to protect yourself and other patients. You don't really always have a great snapshot of the entire background of people, and some people are kind of debatable historians. When they're being treated, they don't have a great memory of like what caused them to be there. So you just want to make sure that you're erring on the side of caution in most scenarios, I would say. But in terms of COVID-19, that was one thing, now that I think about it, that I never really treated a COVID patient or someone who was on any sort of ventilator for COVID-19. So that was nothing, I didn't experience that, but overall I'd just say, yeah, gotta keep it clean, gotta make sure that you're dotting your I's, crossing your T's when it comes to just making sure that things are as cleanly as possible. And yeah, that's all. So I hope this is helpful for whoever might view in the future, but highly recommend Hillcrest. It's you're gonna get a chance to see everything there. It truly is a very interesting place to work, and I would highly recommend it for people who want to be pushed a little bit outside their comfort zone. So thank you. Bye bye.